One of them is kind of philosophical, but the
Right.
simplest version is that you'd have to have zero volume, which is black hole.
Good evening and welcome to the September 4th, 2024 City Council special meeting. I am Mayor Ross, and tonight's special meeting is brought to you live using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. Tonight's recording will be posted on the city's YouTube channel. So welcome and thank you for joining us. City Clerk Dean, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Benson.
Here.
Councilmember Watton.
Here.
Councilmember Holloway.
Here.
Councilmember Washington is not present. Councilmember Cotton. Here. Councilmember Christensen. Here. Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Mayor Ross.
I am here. Council, may I have a, motion to excuse Councilmember Washington? I'm sure he will be here shortly.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Johnson and second by Councilmember Christensen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? And Councilor Washington is excused.
And he won't be here tonight.
Oh, he won't be?
No.
Okay. We have fully excused him for the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Should we just cancel?
We now move on to our first item of special business, which is to approve the agenda. Council may I have a motion to approve the special meeting agenda.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Councilor Cotton, second by Councilor Christensen. Any discussion? There's one item. Review and deliberation of the mayor's proposed budget. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? And it's unanimous and the special meeting agenda is approved. So tonight's agenda topic is review and deliberation of the mayor's proposed 2025-2026 biennial budget. Our directors have been hard at work today addressing the questions raised during last night's special workshop. We have Finance Director Drew Boutte and Budget Manager Jenna Walker will provide the information. Any follow-up items that we need to do will be addressed most likely on Monday during our roundtable. I'll turn it over to Finance Director Drew Boutte.
All right. Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. Good to be here with you tonight. Yesterday, we spent certainly a lot of time, really had a really good, robust conversation regarding the mayor's proposed 25-26 biennial budget. Since yesterday, we've been furiously at work trying to answer some of the questions that you gave us yesterday overall. And so we do have presentation slides, as you're very accustomed to for the most part tonight. And so our goal is to kind of go through those presentation slides with you regarding the questions that we had yesterday and hopefully get some of those questions answered as fully as we possibly can. There are certainly going to be some questions that we will not answer tonight. We will keep those in the back of our minds. For the most part, we've incorporated them into a log in which we will start writing answers to that and then ideally provide that to you. If we don't answer them tonight, we'll be conducting some more research and then ideally getting back to you on Monday for a follow-up on that. In addition, we're expecting more questions tonight as well. Much like a conveyor belt, right? From probably a lot of here on out, kind of at this stage. Take those questions, do what we can to answer that, provide you with the information that you need in order to make decisions on how you may want to move forward with the budget or how you may want to modify that kind of budget moving forward. So with that said, I'm just going to kick it off straight into the Q&A session and start kind of going through question by question with you tonight. And so I know it's a bit hard to see up there.
Boxes on boxes.
Boxes on boxes. Tonight. So let's see what happens now. More boxes. All right, so let's see if we can move that up a little bit. All right, Jana, do you mind sharing your screen in the presentation?
My internet works.
Okay.
How you been?
It's been a good couple of days. You know, I wish I had more time with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could just talk. You know?
Yeah. It's always this interaction, right?
All right, that's right. I enjoy this too.
All right. Okay. Mr. City Administrator Chambliss has brought it up.
All right, thank you for that. So if you don't mind going on to the next slide, and then the next slide after that. So we're going to answer this first question right here. How much has the city historically spent in overtime within the fire and emergency management department? And how does that compare to the 25-26 biennial budget? Well, you can see a chart here and it's a bit difficult to see overall, but in essence, starting from 2018, we had roughly spent $200,000 to $250,000 in overtime in the fire department, and that has climbed up to roughly $360,000 for 2023. That represents roughly a 6-year average spend of $283,000, just specifically for wages and benefits. So that does not include the employee benefits that would come along with that, which would add an additional 30% to that total. The city has budgeted roughly $94,000 for 2025 and $97,000 in overtime for 2026 respectively. And so consequently, that's just there to show you an overtime picture. Another question that you had yesterday is how many firefighter positions would the proposed reduction in overtime fund? If we take that 6-year average at $283,000 and subtract out the $94,000 and the 90 for 25 and the $97,000 for 26, you'd roughly have a difference of $188,000. The average cost of an employee in the fire department who may work overtime is approximately $164,000. As a consequence, that means using that 6-year average that the proposed reduction in overtime budgeted is roughly equal to 1.15 FTEs. If you were to just to account for the 2023 overtime only, because as we know, it's been escalating over time, then the reduction in overtime that we've budgeted is roughly equal to roughly 2.25 FTEs in total. So the difference between the 3 FTEs and the 1.5 to 2.25 FTEs would be paid for basically with the 5% vacancy rate assumption that we're including as a part of the budget. So the overtime reduction is not intended to cover the entirety of the 3 positions, which is why we've introduced a kind of a different budget assumption as a part of the equation overall. We will want to say that overtime is not the only reason for these positions. And so we do certainly have fire chief here with us.
Counselor Benson.
But it seems like if you have more full-time employees doing the same job that would have been done by somebody doing it on overtime, you're going to get better performance out of that as well, out of those hours as well. Not that anybody's not performing well while they're on overtime, but you know, you're
Right.
a little closer to tip top.
Right. So absolutely right. And the goal is to really reduce burnout, right?
So there's
So
an
we
added
experienced
value.
So performance would improve just from the reduction in burnout and the stress that firefighters are currently experiencing, I think overall. So we've talked a little bit about this earlier internally today, but there's a compounding effect, right, to this. Ideally, we're saving portions of our overtime. We're reducing the amount of burnout and stress our firefighters are experiencing, which would increase performance, right, overall across the department. You know, and there's other additional elements to it. The fire chief wants to mention. Sorry, it's the slide that's actually the next one. I think we're close. Oh, next slide, please. Go ahead. Do you mind 2 slides forward? Next one.
Wait.
There we go. We'll go right here, and then we'll pull it back.
Okay. First of all, it looks like this one is just the question that came up yesterday from Councilmember Watton regarding, he made a mention about when the most amount of calls happen. So that's what this slide is. It shows, I know it's kind of small to see, but it does show, you know, starting at midnight on the left-hand side. And then you can see where the biggest amount of call volume is from about 6, 7 o'clock in the morning up until about 6, 7 o'clock at night. So the majority of the calls happen during the day. But the next slide, I think, is the one I wanted to start out with. There we go. Okay. So, you know, Drew provided some of the financial information that you guys were asking for, and I wanted to provide a little bit more detail on, you know, some of the human side of it as to what he said, why we're asking for these 3 firefighters. So I wanted to provide you with the numbers. We talked a little bit about them yesterday, but just to illustrate to you exactly what we mean by how the overtime has gone up. And I've just used the last 3 as an example, just because COVID kind of changed it a little bit. But you can see in 21, we had a total of, you know, the number up there, 4,800 hours overtime. Miscellaneous overtime, that just has to do with all the stuff that's not shift, training, meetings, teaching CPR classes. That's all the miscellaneous. The shift overtime is the overtime the firefighters work to cover for somebody else's shift. And then the number we're really concerned about is the mandatory number. The mandatory is on top of that, the 540 hours in 21. You can see how in 2022, it really jumps up for our overtime hours overall. And then the mandatory went up to 980. And then the one that I'm really concerned about is 23. You can see the overall overtime hours didn't change too much, but you see that mandatory went all the way up to 1,700. And just like I said yesterday, I didn't put it up there, but 2018, our mandatory was 50 hours for the whole year. And now in 23, we're looking at just over 1,700 hours. So that just kind of illustrates what we're talking about for the overtime issue. And then just some other numbers to put out.
Second, Councilor Benson, you have
Yeah, just very quickly, the numbers that we're seeing, are these hours worked or hours paid?
It would
Yes.
be the same.
Yes. Yeah.
Would it be, I don't know how the.
Yeah, these are
accounting-
just straight hours. These are, yeah, it's the same. They wouldn't work. These aren't hours worked. These are overtime hours worked.
So if somebody's working for their 16th hour in a row or whatever beyond, and they're getting paid at double time, would that show up here as 1 hour or as 2 hours?
It would just show up as 1 hour.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the way the firefighter schedule work is anything over their regular shift, regardless of FLSA hours and, you know, what you're used to being over the 40-hour week. Ours are a little bit different, but anything over their regular schedule hours is time and a half.
Okay.
So yeah, these are just the hours. It's not time and a half hours.
Okay.
Just some other numbers to give to you. For 2023, just some of the overtime hours.
Chief,
One
could
thing,
you also
Councilor
just
Cotton.
let them know the length of the shifts that the firefighters are working?
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but
Okay.
24-hour shifts.
Or-
Actually 48 hours, the way that they
Or-
normally work is a 48-hour shift. So 2 days in a row, and then they have 4 days off, 2 in a row, 4 off, 2 in a row, 4 off.
Or 96 in a row and 2 off? This is how it's been lately.
So just to illustrate a couple of what that meant for firefighters. One firefighter worked 621 hours of overtime, which equates to about an extra 25 shifts a year. The next highest worked 697 hours overtime, which was 29 shifts a year. And then our highest was 741 hours overtime, which is an extra 31 shifts a year. When you look at it, the firefighters work about 107 shifts a year, 9 shifts a month. So in reality, some of these guys work an extra 3 months in overtime, having to fill in for other people. So again, some of this is information. I know the Public Safety Committee has heard this, but just to make sure that the whole council understands some of the things we're talking about, the causes of why we're in this situation with the overtime is, you know, we've fallen below our staffing minimums. We're staffed at 12, which gives us the 4 per shift. But because of promotions, retirements, L&I injuries where they're out multiple months, that drops us below the 12. Since 2020, we've had 5 members leave for other departments. We've had 2 that have been retired because of medical retirements. And then we've had a couple others that have missed multiple months, 6, 7 months for L&I injuries. All of that together is what brings us down below that 12. So in reality, what that means is, even though we have 4 people on shift, probably about 80% of the time we're down to 3 just because of contractual days off that's in their contract. And so whenever we're down to 3, anytime anybody calls in sick, it's going to cause us overtime. Anytime we're missing positions, as in just like I talked about resignations, empty shifts, that drops us even further. So we can get in a situation where every single shift, every single day of that shift, we have to bring in an overtime person because they're down 1 person for resignation or something like that. And then because we have to give the contractual days off, we go down. And actually there's many times where we, in 2023, where we fell 2 people down. So of the 1 person, you know, of the people working, 1 was their regular shift and 2 people are on overtime. I think in August of 23 was the most overtime we had. That was 31 shifts for the month. Normally, you know, back before this happened, we'd get 2, 3, 4 shifts a month. We had 31 shifts of overtime in August of 23 because we were down to 8 firefighters as opposed to 12. So this is the problem that we're trying to combat. And again, like you've heard me say, we're trying to build that bigger bench so we can absorb some of these losses that are inevitably going to happen just because of the nature of our job Firefighters, when they get hurt, they can't come in and sit at a desk and do their job. They're off. We have to cover them with another person. And so we get these multiple month absences where we have to cover with the overtime, and hence the mandatory overtime. So Drew talked about some of the problems that this overtime caused, which was finance, but mainly what I'm focused on is the burnout. It's just too many hours. It's too many hours for our firefighters. As Councilmember Christensen pointed out, we have a demanding job. They need to have time off. Multiple studies talk about, the time off, the burnout, the mental strain on the firefighters. You need to have some downtime, and our guys aren't getting that. Just like Councilmember Cotton talked about, although they're scheduled for 48-hour shifts, many times they're working 72 hours in a row, which is the maximum they can work, but they don't get those 4 days off. They might work 3 days in a row, get 1 day off, but then they're called back mandatory the next day. So they're just working way too many hours. And that just takes a toll, work-life balance, toll mentally, strain on the firefighters. It's just wearing them down. Part of the reason why we've had 5 firefighters leave in the last couple of years. When they can go somewhere else, less hours, more money, it's hard to keep those people here. And then another part of that is the retention. That's what I just talked about with the less hours, more money. And they can go somewhere else where they don't have to work so many overtime hours. But like I pointed out, the biggest thing that I'm worried about is the mandatory. Overtime is always going to be there. We're never going to get rid of it. People always call in sick. The jump in the mandatory hours is really what I'm worried about. And the Public Safety Committee has heard me talk about this multiple times. And just to make sure that you understand, mandatory means they're forced to come in on their day off. They might have something planned. Their vacation might have to get canceled. They're told an hour before they go off in the morning, hey, guess what? You have to stay another 24 hours, call your wife, you're not coming home, because we have to have those crews on. They don't have a choice. We have to have those crews responding for the shifts. Example, we had a firefighter that, put in at the beginning of the year for his son's birthday off. And then the day before I told him, I don't have anybody else. You're the last person available. You have to work your son's birthday. This party that you planned, you're gonna have to cancel it. Your wife's gonna have to handle it because I need you here and you can't go home. That's the kind of stuff we got to avoid, because that just is going to wear our guys down. I've seen this building the last couple of years. It's not a new issue. We've been trying to deal with it, but it just keeps compounding when we lose people from shift. My number one goal when I made the chief, was to try and figure out how to solve this overtime issue. And more importantly, the mandatory. Firefighters are can-do personalities. They do what they need to do. They'll show up, they'll do their shifts, but they roll up their sleeves and they'll get it done. Because that's what they do, but it's wearing on them, and it's my job to protect the firefighters. And the best way I can do that is to try and figure out how we keep these overtime hours down. The amount of overtime they're working isn't safe, it isn't healthy, and it isn't sustainable for the department and the firefighters. So that's why every time we talk about, hey, what's the number one thing facing the fire department? It's our overtime. So how do we combat that? I looked at multiple solutions, 1 firefighter, 2 firefighter, 3 firefighters, different shift configurations, increasing volunteer firefighters. Each had its pros and cons, but really, what it came down to is the most effective, which would be to add 3 firefighters. It's the most efficient use of staffing. In order to reduce the overtime, we need to have an additional person on the shift, so that, like I said yesterday, 1 is always gone. So that leaves us 4. And then of that 4, we can still absorb 1 more loss and still have our 3-person minimum, whether that's through somebody calling in sick, somebody on L&I, whatever it is. We don't have to call back overtime until we lose another person off that shift. The other ability it would bring by having 3 firefighters is I can move them around. Say, for example, 1 shift loses 2 people. I can move the 5th from one of the other shifts to that shift and help balance it out. If we only had 1, I wouldn't be able to have that same flexibility. So that's how the 3 makes the most sense. And then again, like I mentioned, what really hurt us in 22 and 23, why that mandatory went up so high, is because we had multiple people gone per shift. And like I said, every single time that shift was up, I had to call in 1 shift of overtime, sometimes even 2. 1 wouldn't really work because it wouldn't take a big enough bite out of the overtime. It's really not going to make a dent on it. Two, we could possibly make two work, but because of the restrictions in the contract about how that 4 on, 4 off shift works, it really is, you're not really gonna see as much of a saving as the 3. Plus, it takes away that ability of me able to move them around per shift if we need to. And that 4 on, 4 off shift, it's not a desirable firefighters. We'd have a hard time keeping the youngest firefighters here because not many departments use that shift. They'll go somewhere else where they don't have to do that 12-hour shift. And it just wouldn't be effective to cover the overtime completely. Okay, and then it doesn't, the last thing is it just doesn't allow for crew continuity. The more the guys work together with the same crew, they build that teamwork, they build that shift up. It's safer for the firefighters to be on a consistent crew instead of every single day they come in, they're working with a different crew. So that's just kind of an overview of why this is an issue and how we can solve it. But as I mentioned yesterday too, is there's a couple other things that'll come along with having this extra firefighter that I think is going to be a benefit besides the overtime issue. And that has to do with the amount of times the unit is available in the city. Right now with 3 firefighters on shift, they go together wherever. If they get a fire call, they all go on the engine. They get an A call, they all go on the A car. That A car goes to the hospital, they all go to the hospital. There's no way to split up 3 and be a safe operation. So if we transport to a hospital, they're gone 1 up to 2 hours that they're out of the city. We're relying on our mutual aid partners to backfill. If we had an additional firefighter, so there'd be more times that we have that 4th firefighter on shift, I'm going to be able to split the crews. Say all 4 of them go on an A call, they decide they need to transport. 2 could transport with the A car, 2 could stay behind and either jump in the other A car on another, or use the engine to respond to a BLS call. They won't be able to handle any fire calls other than being there and being command or something, but they wouldn't be able to staff up the engine without 3, but they would be able to handle any BLS calls. So by having those 4 firefighters more, we'll be able to split our crews more, keep a unit here in the city more often than we are right now. The other piece that kind of goes along with that is the wrinkle that the volunteers are going to add. Right now, the volunteers work, basically, they're required to work 2 to 3 shifts a month. Our volunteer numbers are pretty low right now. We were down to 9, we're up to 13 with some new ones. Normally, we like to try and keep that around 20. So our goal for next year is to really build it back up and get to that 20 number. That's what we budgeted for. By having more numbers with those volunteers, that'll pretty much guarantee almost every day we're going to have a volunteer on shift. And what that does is that just gives us 1 more person. So instead of going 2 and 2, we can put both rigs available and go 3 and 2. A career person and a volunteer aid car driver can handle an aid call, and then we can keep 3 firefighters on the engine. Again, splitting that crew up. 1 goes on 1 call, the other one can stay behind. So that's kind of an extra bonus of having these other people, as it increases the reliability of having a unit still here in Snoqualmie for those multiple calls. And then lastly, we just recently passed a public safety tax increase. That's a big win for the city. It was 64, 65% passing. What that does is, it does, although, we can point to the citizens when they ask, what did I get for that? What did I get for that? What's the bang for the buck I got for that increase? Having that extra unit available, although we're not necessarily changing the service levels, by saying that we're able to bring on 3 more firefighters next year with part of that money, we'll be able to say that we were able to split those crews more often and have the service inside the city would stay in the city more often. So another thing that we can point to when people ask, when the citizens ask you, hey, I just passed this public safety tax increase, what did I get for it? You can say that we added 3 firefighters, which increases the reliability for the city for having a unit available when we need it. So those are kind of the things I put together to just kind of explain the human side to the dollar side of why we're adding these firefighters. We don't take this lightly. We know this is a big ask with the times we're in right now, and giving us 3 more people is a big ask for the city. But I really think that, not only is it going to help protect the firefighters, but it'll also provide some dividends to the city and the citizens to increase that reliability for the unit. So just wanted to give you that, the human side of that. Any other questions I can help illustrate what this 3 firefighters can do for us.
Pretty clear.
Back to the money side. Okay.
Thank you, chief.
Thanks, Chief.
All right. Thank you for that, Mike. Much appreciated. And just kind of echoing what he said a little bit regarding the public safety sales tax as well. So a lot of these plans are hatched before we knew that the voters would pass the public safety sales tax. And so consequently, there was the possibility we tied the public safety sales tax to the inflationary increases that we've seen, but that doesn't mean that we can then redeploy this money to support these firefighters for the most part, and then potentially use the 5% vacancy, right, savings overall to help us through the inflationary increases that we've seen over time. So you can kind of move the sources of funds around in order to match the expenditures that is required for the most part. And I think it was very clear, the signal that was provided by the public regarding that vote. And as a consequence, the administration and council, I think ideally is being very responsive to that signal, that very clear signal that we got from the voters in August in support of public safety and making sure that we employ and equipped public safety professionals.
Counselor Benson?
You know, I think it's also really important to make the point that what you've proposed in having this conservative view of our vacancy rate, but also more realistic than what we had before, if it frees us up to where we can address what is really a public safety issue, I think it's a huge highlight. And I don't know if you and Ms. Walker have performance reviews or anything like that, but from where I'm sitting, this is finance helping save lives. And in no uncertain terms, this is a very significant accomplishment of what you're doing here, and I really appreciate it. So I think this is, I think you're, when you initially proposed this creative way of looking at the budget, I was quite honestly skeptical. But this, to me, I am sold on this idea. I think this is an incredibly good way to use smart budgeting. I really appreciate what you guys have done, and that you've explained it slowly and with small words that I can follow. So thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Counselor Johnson?
Yeah, so I had to think about this for a while because it is somewhat of a shift in our way of thinking about things. And I came to a concern about it. And I just sent an email to finance director about this. This feels like perhaps a lever that we can use once. Changing our staffing assumption. If we do this, then what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we've freed up some funds in the budget. However, those lines are still going to cross in the future. We already pulled the 5% lever. We can't go down to assuming 10% vacancy and then 15% vacancy, and right. So that is my, I guess, concern about it, is that this seems like a lever that we can pull once. And is this a good use of that lever? Is this the reason to do it? Maybe so. It's just caution.
Counselor Watton?
So let me in part defend the proposal. It is a shift in policy. I think it's a very good one. For those of us who hire people, we know that there's always going to be a certain amount of vacancies. Yet our budgets have been 100% filled positions. And the reality is, even if you have an opening, there is a period of time between the hiring and the onboarding of that individual. Sometimes it can be 60 days, it can be longer. And this came up during our COVID experience. At times, our staffing, we were down 20%. And we have over 100 employees. That's 20 employees, yet we budget for 100%. And that's part of the reason why those lines cross so much sooner. And we always heard about the fiscal cliff that really did not exist because our lever is, and most businesses are in the same situation, is people power. It's personnel. That's where you're going to find, usually the top 1-2 expenses of a business, of a government, of a nonprofit is in people. And not reflecting that in your budget, we're doing a disservice for our citizens by not having the vital services that they depend on us for, by saying we don't have the money, when the reality is we have the money. We also have very healthy reserves at 15%. We did that deliberately during the COVID years, and as we were coming out, we increased our reserves. So we're not touching the reserves. They continue to grow. And this is a more responsible way of addressing some very, very important things. And I agree. I mean, if there's anything that we as a government we need to do, and that is to protect our citizens. And we're doing it in a very responsible way. And I commend Drew and Jana for putting this forward, because 5% is a very conservative number. It probably could be pushed more out, but 5% is still very doable. And here's the other one. We can always decide to slow down hiring. We can always slow down when somebody's onboarded. We can decide when a position comes open, if we're getting too close to where it puts us at a disadvantage, we simply don't fill the positions. And that's what management does. That's what businesses do all the time. They manage it very closely. And that's why we have a professional team to make sure that we're on budget, we're performing well, and we have the reserves necessary. So those are the things that I would just kind of add to it.
Counselor Benson?
Yeah, and just adding on to what Councilman Watton was saying, if you look at page 15 and 16 of the mayor's budget, it goes through the proposed changes in FTEs throughout all the departments. And I mean, if I'm understanding this, which I very well might not be, but at least in my understanding of it, it looks to me like there's a reallocation of some positions, there's the elimination of other positions, and there's the addition of other critical positions. And these are 3 of the critical positions that are accounted for, I think, in a not haphazard way. And this strategy of looking at what is our most critical need and how do we address it, I think is a good one. I think your point that we can't say, what if we said 10% next year? I think we'd have to say we said 5% last year. Are we going to go 15 next? And I think that's a valid point. But for the situation that we're in, I think we do know that 10% is overly conservative, and that we can better serve the citizens by looking at it in this way and at 5% and still maintain a conservative position.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
So we'll throw a word of caution in here. The work doesn't go away. What you saw with police numbers also is that when they have a vacant position, they are still doing the work through overtime and everything else. That overtime is at a premium. Okay, so you may have a vacant, but you're still doing that work somehow, and you're doing it at a premium rate to get it done. Okay, so, and I mean, if somebody were to tell me right now that all the departments were running a surplus of 5% of their labor costs across the board, that would support it. We're kind of making an assumption here, guys. And no, that whole of, 5 is good, let's go 10. No, the math will catch up very fast. It doesn't work because you're filling in that hole with expensive overtime hours. Or you're not getting some work done. In some areas, you will just say, I'm not doing that. Fire and police, you don't have that choice. You gotta be there. Okay, so caution. I'm not saying let's not do it. I'm saying let's do it, but be aware. This is gonna take some effort to make sure it works going through next year. And don't really think of it as this is a lever you can pull that often. It only goes so far and then you start to hurt yourself.
So I'm gonna pull Janet Walker up for the next question, for the most part, but it is in essence, one card that you can pull out of your pocket. Our goal is to kind of continuously have some cards, right, and figure out what those cards are for the future, to help us out, for the most part, because we do know that that line crossing is important. And so we're continuously trying to work towards finding some of those solutions to help us. I do want to say that from the administration to several of the council members, the seeds were planted early. So it's not just the finance department, it's been a collective effort to actually come to this conclusion that we need to apply the 5% vacancy rate.
You
in
guys
this
get all the
situation.
credit.
So, well, I don't deserve it, so. So let me pull Janet Walker up.
You're the ones who told me.
Okay, good evening. This question is, how does modifying the full staffing assumption to include a 5% vacancy rate help to fund the 3 additional firefighters? And I'd just like to thank council for answering that question almost in its entirety. But I will just address some data points. Essentially, we have in the past budgeted for the general fund to have no vacancies. And what happens is when you have a position that's vacant for 3 months or 6 months, all of a sudden you have $30,000, $75,000 of capital that could have been deployed somewhere useful within the city that just wasn't. And the next slide shows the current vacancies at the city within general fund. This is only the general fund. We have 56.32 filled positions out of 67.32 positions, which means we have a 16% vacancy rate. So that's 3 times the rate that we're deploying in the general fund right now. And this is only being deployed within the general fund. Our utilities are not affected by this. Our internal service funds are not affected by this. So this is where we have a large pool of employees that we can use and maybe fall safer with that 5% rate and effectively deploy that capital. The next slide shows the dollars that are at stake. If we had budgeted under the assumptions that underpinned our 2023-24 budget, we would be budgeting 11.6 million in 2025 for salaries and benefits and 12.3 million in 2026. With a 5% vacancy, we can lower that in 2025 to 11 million. And in 2026, we can lower it to 11.7 million. What that means is that we have 579,000 available in 2025 to deploy elsewhere for the firefighters, or whatever other uses we may determine are key to the budget. And in 2026, we have $614,000 that we are freeing up with these assumptions.
So I just want to speak to Councilmember Holloway's point as well. Some of those positions that are vacant are police and fire. So even though it's 16%, 5% feels like a generally safe that would pull from the other positions that we have currently open. So we will probably be sticking with that 5% in the future. So with that said, I'd like to move on to the next question after that. You don't mind going to slide 10? Thank you. We're going to be moving on to this next question. So thank you, Chief Bailey. Yeah, you can leave the hot seat right there. So the next question is, how was the estimated increase in comprehensive fee study revenue derived? And how much of the estimated increase is constituted by certain fees? So just to kind of kick off the answer, the 25-26 biennial budget currently includes an estimated $100,000 and $300,000 of revenue, respectively, for 25 and 26, resulting from the comprehensive fee study. This estimate was consistent with what we put into the 23-24 biennial budget. And so in essence, there's some carry forward into this budget. You can move on to the next one. Due to staffing issues, the comprehensive fee study was not completed during the 23-24 biennium and was therefore carried forward, as I mentioned, into 25-26, including the estimated revenue amounts. So that's the same numbers that we had previously that we've just thrown into 25 and 26. The estimated revenue was an educated guess based on some of the following comparisons. So not kind of a comprehensive math formula or equation that we came up with, but you know, it's one of these things. I don't know if you could put that motion into words, but basically that's what it was. So if you're looking at building revenues versus expenditures, building revenues include building permits, building inspection fees, fire safety inspection fees, and plan checking fees. And so the chart that you're looking at here includes building expenditures in orange and building revenues in green. Back in 2018, this is between 2018 and 2023. Back in 2018 and 2019, we were generating more building revenue than we were paying out in building expenses. But as a consequence of the drop in development over time, we have been collecting less in building revenue than we've been paying out in building expenditures. Building divisions or departments are normally funded pretty heavily by the fees that they generate. You do not necessarily have a consistent building division or department. It will often increase and decrease at the rate of development that's taking place in a community. And you often want to staff up when there's a lot of development, and then you often want to staff down when there's not as much, which is why you're seeing the drop in expenditures over time. Other cities will, from time to time, also come up with cost recovery rates. And we've talked a little bit about cost recovery rates yesterday. We're going to talk about some of those cost recovery rates in a slide coming up here. But in essence, some of the cities around us, and through more benchmarking, probably through a comprehensive study, will help us with that. But some of the other cities benchmark relatively high, I want to say, for those cost recovery fees overall, making sure that the building departments and divisions are cost recovered as much as they possibly can. We can move on to the next slide. In terms of a ratio of building revenue to expenditures, for every $1 spent, how much fee revenue does the city collect? And so I've got figures between 2018 and 2023. In 2018, you can see that we generated $1.38 for every $1 spent in building expenses. And that decreased to roughly 65 cents per dollar spent for 2023, for an average over the 6-year period of roughly 74 cents per dollar spent. I do want to note, and this would be in support of the comprehensive fee study, is that building fees were not updated between 2014 and 2021, and there haven't been any catch up for that period of time. So since that time, we've increased them at the rate of inflation overall, but there was a period in which the building fees remained, or building permits remained, basically stagnant. As a consequence, you may be asking the question, well, how much more revenue would the city collect, assuming if we had a different kind of cost recovery goal overall? So if we were to increase that cost recovery from 74% or 74 cents per dollar spent to 80 cents per dollar spent, you'd be collecting about $250,000 more over the 6-year period, or roughly $42,000 more annually. You get up to a 90% cost recovery goal. Your average per year would increase to 105. If you were to fully cost recover for the building division or department, your average would increase to about $168 per year. And this would be coming from developers, in essence, not necessarily the residents that we have here present with us. We move on to the next slide. Now you'll find a chart of park revenues versus park expenditures. These revenues include park rentals, and there's many families and residents that basically rent out a park for a day. But then there's also youth organizations as well that rent out our fields over time too. If you're looking at this right here, you'll notice that our park expenses have been relatively consistent over time. And in addition to that, our fees have been relatively consistent over time. Our park expenses are roughly topping out about $2 million. And then the fees that we generate to support those parks, basically roughly around $250,000 on an annual basis there. If we're going to move on to the next slide. For every $1 spent on park expenses, how much fee revenue does the city collect? How much does the city collect in park rentals, basically? Between 2018 and 2023, we've been collecting between roughly 3 cents per dollar spent on park expenditures to roughly around 9 cents per dollar spent on park expenditures, for an average of about 6 cents per dollar spent on park expenditures overall. As a consequence, how much more would the city have collected, assuming the same level of activity, if you were to increase that cost recovery goal overall to say 10% or 15%? You'll see those kind of jumps right there. If you're to achieve a 20% cost recovery rate, your average per year in those fees that we would collect would increase to $255,000. As a consequence of the comprehensive fee study, the goal would be able to set those cost recovery goals. A lot of other cities go through a comprehensive fee study update roughly every 10 years or so. I've looked at a few of those cost recovery studies from Redmond, trying to find Bellevue example overall, as well, and Kirkland too. And they go through processes. When you go explore some of those other cities, you'll see that Redmond, they're setting their cost recovery goals at a higher rate than what we've got currently right now. And so I think with that said, hopefully that answers that question. I guess I'll open it up to more.
Counselor Johnson?
Yeah, since I think I'm the one who kind of asked for this. This does help quite a bit, and it's actually more detailed than I was even expecting. So I'm a very happy person in terms of the input. With regard to the second part of this, the ratio of park revenues, expenditures, and all that, obviously, we're not paying for our park expenditures from the fees. Even under 20%, it's mostly coming from elsewhere to do that. And I think that the concern that I would have of raising these fees by, let's say up to 20% is, we've got kids with their birthday parties and we have all of our youth activities. How much of that would start to go away, and who would have access, and whom do we think deserves to have access? I think those would be the questions that would start to have on that front. So obviously, study will tell us a lot. I would hope that if we look seriously at raising our fees for the use of the parks, that we would reach out more directly to the youth sports organizations, especially to kind of get their input on what effect that could have on them and what they would perceive as the effect on our city. I'd hope that we'd be very direct and intentional if we went that route. There were other types of fees that were listed in here. Now I should have had it ready before I raised my hand. But anyway, I think it was something like ambulance fees was one of the things. Did that go into this, or is this something else on top? Or is that something else on
This
top
would go
of this?
into the total comprehensive fee study, right, for the most part, but I don't have any additional slides
On that,
related to
right.
that. Yeah.
Okay, so there are potentially other fees beyond just those two buckets.
Yeah, I think we'd be surprised at how many fees
Right.
there are. And I think over time, we want to develop a very comprehensive fee schedule so that you can counsel as full transparency of what those fees are kind of across the board, across all the departments.
Yeah.
Just on your point alone, when it comes to the youth sports organizations, for example, they're part of this, right? What they pay in fees, right? Overall, it's a question of public goods, right? Overall, as well. And so if we are maintaining a ball field in which we're grooming to support that organization, should it come from taxes, or should the organization directly pay for that, right? Through these fees, basically, that we charge. Some of the same conversations that we've had earlier this year when it comes to the community center expansion project as well. When it comes to maybe organizations that would be paying for the ability to swim at a facility like that, we're kind of along the same lines of within that same sort of realm of conversation overall when it comes to fees. Okay. All right, so next one, if we don't mind after that, this is Jana. Awesome.
We have a couple nice and straightforward ones. Why have non-utility capital services decreased by 9 million between 2023, 24 and 25, 26? And I just want to point out that this was all part of our approved by council non-utility capital plan, improvement plan, which was adopted July 8th, 2024. And the services line item relates to a couple things that generally happen early in the life of a project. For example, design, construction management throughout the life, and professional services can vary. So really what we're seeing is a shift in when our expenditures, where we are in the life of the projects. And the big one in this is the community center. During 23, 24, we had estimated about 6.6 million as part of the services. And consequently, we have a big drop relating to that. There are other projects that are in different phases or that haven't been continued into this next biennium that I can name if you're interested, but that's mainly what's happening. It's just about where we are in the life of each project. The next question is, why does non-utility capital revenue increase from 5.4 million in 2025 to 14.1 million in 2026? This is also part of our approved non-utility capital improvement plan. And the majority of that difference relates to the community center. We have 5.8 million relating to undetermined community center contributions. We have 1.3 million relating to the YMCA contribution to the community center. And then the third one, that's an increase, we're estimating that that would happen in 2026, is the U.S. Department of Transportation grant for railroad crossings. Any questions about any of that? I think we can go to the next slide. We had a question about intergovernmental revenues increasing 93% within the general fund. There were several things that were the main culprits for that, although there are many changes from biennium to biennium. The first is we have updated coding for GEMT, which is our ground emergency medical transport. That was originally booked to charges for goods and services. And it's actually something that comes from the Washington State Healthcare Authority. So we've moved that into intergovernmental. And in addition, I'll just point out that we're expecting 720,000 in this upcoming biennium, and we expected 300,000 in the last biennium. That was the first year we ever received revenue for that. The next one is Washington Department of Commerce grants. We have two that total 875,000. The first is 500,000 for climate change grant, and the second is a paper to digital grant for 375,000. And then we also, those exceed 93%. So we also have the loss of the PILT related to the Salish Lodge that is captured within that, and that's decreasing some of our intergovernmental revenues. Questions before we move on there? Why have transfers in decreased by 100% within the general fund is the question. And I believe we answered that last time, but I'll just reiterate. We had committed 2.5 million to the community center, and that was the biggest transfer out of the general fund. We are not anticipating anything of that size in this upcoming biennium. There's a smaller transfer out for something close to 200,000 that goes into the equipment replacement, repair and replacement fund, and then also 10,000 that goes towards arts. Next slide, please. What is in non-departmental sustainability, et cetera, within the 10-year forecast is our question, and that's in Appendix A1 if you're following along. That is composed of a mix of items that can't really be tied to a certain department. There are shared supplies. One example of those is first aid supplies. Postage is another one of those. We also have membership and other dues. That includes things like Meadowbrook, preservation donations, and also the ongoing maintenance. We have some other we have the Greater Seattle Partners, the Puget Sound Regional Council, Sound Cities Association, Puget Sound Clean Air Agency dues, Snoqualmie Valley Watershed, Water Resource Inventory Area. So lots of dues that we pay out of this that come straight out of the general fund and can't really be assigned to finance or HR or anything like that. And then the final one is customer deposits that are refunded. And that is, that fills up the bucket for sustainability. I do want to point out though that we had those final three within the forecast are all grouped together with that under non-departmental. It includes human services, port services, and then also this sustainability, et cetera. And we had one of our numbers off. So when you get the second version of the budget document, you'll see some changes there. It doesn't change anything in total for our forecast, but those numbers will shift just a little bit when you receive that.
Thank you. Group. All right. So a couple of these questions came in today. Did the administration budget for any license or permit fee revenue from potential development activity outside of Snoqualmie? And the answer is outside of the base amount of license and fee and permit activity for small infill development or building modifications and the aforementioned Snoqualmie Mill, the administration did not budget for any other significant development activity. All right, no questions? All right. Next one is, did the administration budget for any payment in lieu of taxes or other sources of revenue generated by tribal properties? The answer to this is no, the administration did not budget for any source of revenue generated by tribal properties, except for the amount of utility rate revenue the city would expect to receive, forecasted by the utility rate study from the casino and its expansion. So in terms of sales tax revenue or B&O tax revenue from say the Salish Lodge and Spa, no, we didn't budget for any of that. Next one. So this one, why has nothing been budgeted for the Affordable Housing Fund? The answer to that is council and staff are working or have worked to develop an RFP. This is kind of Councilmember Wadding's wheelhouse a little bit, right? And once proposals are received and a decision from council is made, then staff will come back with a budget amendment reflecting the decision. Council did direct staff during the creation of the 23-24 biennial budget to not appropriate funds for the Affordable Housing Fund unless there was a plan to support the budget requested. And so consequently, that's why you see nothing appropriated for that fund right now. That could change depending on council. All right, and so I think if there's any follow-up discussion on that one.
Councilor Johnson.
And I think that in terms of appropriating the funds for affordable housing, those are fairly restricted, so we'd have to have something to appropriate to, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they'd have to be at least matched up with the plan, right?
Yeah.
You know, spent on affordable housing expenses, so. Mhm. So with that, we can go on to the next one. I'm going to call up Mr. Bennett back there. Thank you.
Okay, so we have two questions to answer this evening. The first one regarding the utility admin position. So I'll let you read what's there on the screen, but I'll note that currently we have 37, sorry, Brian, we have 37 staff in Parks and Public Works. We have one admin. And so what you see at the top there is the workload. That first section is the current workload of that administrative assistant. And you'll note on the second bullet that actually some of that workload is being redistributed around the group. So the superintendents are some of our highest paid Teamster employees, and they manage programs that have significant risk and significant responsibility. They're currently doing lower level administrative tasks because we just don't have that capacity. And so that's taking up valuable time in their workload. And in addition, you can see that there's a wide range of things that the admin assistant is engaged in and unable to keep up with those tasks. Plus, it's going to increase, and there's a couple of drivers for that. One is the Tyler Munis system. So residents will be sending in requests for work to be done. And it makes sense for our admin assistant to create those work orders in the system and then push those out to the different departments. That will be additional workload. In addition, Tyler is going to change the way that we do accounts payable. And there's going to be processes in Tyler that will need to be done by an admin assistant or an equivalent position within the department. And I think, you know, that's a summary. Obviously, there's a lot of information on the screen. Do you have questions about that so far?
Just the
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
Tyler Munis, it's going to take us more effort with Tyler Munis.
We're changing processes. So, and finance may have to help me with this, but the current way that we do accounts payable and the way we are going to do it is going to shift. And there will be some additional responsibilities for Parks and Public Works and possibly other departments to get that information and get that those invoices paid. So right now, the workflow is we do an invoice payment authorization, we sign the invoice and we send it over to finance and they then process it from there. We will be able to do more of that process within the department, and actually some of the work that's currently done by the account clerks will actually be done within the Parks and Public Works department. And I believe that's true for other departments as well.
I think City Administrator Chambliss, you also had a comment?
Yeah, so currently, finance is providing almost like a concierge service when it comes to accounts payable. The supervisors are coding the expenses on the invoices, confirming the purchase things are appropriate and where they are, that they're actually there. Then they code out those documents. Then they're all sent down here to finance. And finance is the one packaging them, putting them into Springbrook, generating the account payable and everything else. With Tyler, that work will be distributed to the different divisions. So finance will receive a package in Tyler that is put together. As specifically for public works, you're not going to want each division having figures in that packet because it expands your possibility for errors. So you're going to want 1 or 2 dedicated people to pull that packet together for that department before it gets sent on to finance. Thank you.
Thanks.
So the next 3 slides are related to the budget request for 4 wastewater backup pumps. So this has been a journey of discovery for me, and I'll say that there is a lot of work being done behind the scenes to keep critical systems running, and it's really, really important. And there have been some close calls, which we'll get into, that relate to this budget request. So that is Alec Bagley on the right, a wastewater operator, next to an example of the kind of pumps that we're requesting in the biennium.
So the gray one on the left is the pump.
Yes, thank you. So
That's all what's going on.
So the way this works is we are required in these systems by the Department of Ecology to have backups already within the lift stations. So these are duplex or triplex systems. So either there are 2 pumps or there are 3 pumps, and one of those pumps, any one of those pumps is capable of dealing with the full flow, the peak flow of that station. So if the peak flow of that station is 2,200 gallons per minute, any one pump can do it. The backup pump, which is somewhat of a misnomer, which I'll get into, is also capable of doing that. These pumps don't sit there, so we don't have one working and one resting, so all the hours going on one pump and none on the other. What we have is a lead pump and a lag pump. The lead pump is the one cycling at the time, then it cycles through, and at a certain threshold, then the lag pump kicks in and takes over. So these systems are receiving hours, they're receiving wear and tear, and so on. And as you'll see, we'll get to the 3rd slide. There have been instances where we've had the duplex pump, one of the pumps, fail, and it has taken months to either repair it or to replace it due to lead times and other issues. The concern here is basically we want the sewer to stay in the lines. If we have one pump failure, if it takes months to then replace or repair that pump, and when the second pump goes, we're in trouble. And so what staff did in order to help me present this is they went through and they assessed, they gave me basically the data of, okay, why these pumps? Why these 4? Because we have many more pumps than that. We have many more stations than that. So the assessment criteria they put together were, number 1, the proximity to bodies of water. The river, the Kimball Creek, wetlands, and so on. Number 2, size of the pump station, i.e. the gallons per minute. There's a big variation. We have a couple of stations that are pumping huge amounts and some that are lesser so. So that's a factor in those criteria. The age of the pump, some of these have been around since 1997 and still in service. And then last, the overall condition. Age and condition may be different. For instance, the hospital pump station pump, the catering that the hospital does generates a lot of grease. That causes issues for that pump. It's a much, I think that pump was replaced in 2014, but the overall condition is of a pump that is much older. So this is the background data on that, and that is really difficult to see, but I will describe it to you. So those are, the top chart has a list of all the different pump stations, and in the right next to the name of each pump station in superscript is a number, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are the stations which we're recommending we have a backup pump for. And the advantage is that there are duplicates of those same types of pumps in other lift stations. In other words, the primary concerns that we have for pumps failing, which are indicated in yellow, the lift stations indicated in yellow, those same pumps will also work with secondary concerns, pumps that, you know, our operators are not concerned are going to fail within, you know, any time period in the next couple of years necessarily. But if they do, those same pumps will work. So we have a layer of redundancy built in there as well. And then, Mike, if you go to the third slide. So that's all, you know, that's all conceptual. So let's talk real life. So we had a couple of scenarios here. Scenario 1 at Railroad Lift Station, which is the second most critical facility in terms of the volume of sewage that it handles. We had an equipment failure. The power cords failed to one of the pumps, and that took 4 months to get the new cords. And we rented a backup pump at a cost of $30,000 until that repair was completed. And so significant cost there just to rent the equipment to keep a second pump, a duplex pump going in case that remaining pump failed. And then the second example, also last year in Carmichael Lift Station, we had a pump failure. The lead time on materials was 5 months, and the cost of the rebuild, which we did in-house with our staff, was $22,000. It was 5 days of staff time in addition to that. However, renting that backup pump was $6,500 a month, came out to $32,500. You put that together, the cost of repair and the rental backup pump was $54,500. The cost of a new pump is $28,000. And if we have it here, we don't have to wait 5 months and you know, for it to arrive and so on.
Councilor Johnson.
Perfect. Question sliding. So then if you go back just a slide there. Okay. So it says for number 2 that the pump had to be rebuilt. So order the parts and the rentals covered during the time. And then I assumed that that pump has been rebuilt at this point, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, if I were to take apart my vehicle's engine and try to put it back together, I'm not sure that it would run as well as it did originally. In fact, it wouldn't. I'm not sure for how long it would run at all. Is that this kind of scenario, or is it more like if I were to send my vehicle to a professional who rebuilds the engine and I can trust it's going to last a long time? Because there's two different
It's the
things.
second. It is absolutely the second. So our wastewater operators and Tom, the superintendent, has been rebuilding pumps for 20 years and has a lot of experience with that. So it is doable. What Tom told me today is that, you know, it's actually possible for one staff member to rebuild a pump. It just takes a while to move through the parts. As far as pulling it and putting it back, it's a couple of staff, but one staff member is capable to rebuild those pumps with original manufacturer parts.
So then follow up. So then, maybe we don't need to replace it then. Yeah, if it has been rebuilt. So for how many pumps are we in that kind of a situation then? Where, yeah, I understand that if we'd have known that we could have just replaced it, then it would have been cheaper to have done that. Cool. Yeah, so for how many coming up are we asking to have them actually be replaced versus rebuilt?
So I will get to that answer, but I'm going to say something first that's going to inform it. The cost of a new pump is a few $1,000s more than the cost of rebuild. That is something that Tom told me today. And that is, that kind of points to your question. What I would say is that the staff do not know when these pumps are going to fail. They maintain them and they check them every single day. So all of these pumps are inspected every single day. And it is not detectable, or it's not a known condition of exactly when it is going to fail. So that leads to decisions about rebuild versus replacement. It's difficult to predict.
City Administrator Chambliss?
And also, I don't know if you are or not, but I'm getting the impression you may be reading into this that we would be throwing away a pump that failed if we deployed one of these spares. And that would be based upon the condition of the pump. It doesn't mean that it's just going to be replaced and then thrown away. If it can be rebuilt, it will be rebuilt and we still have a spare. It depends on the failure and what happens. I mean, if the housing blows, then it's junk. But
Councilor Cotton?
Is it, this lag time in getting like new pumps ordered, is this like a continuation of a supply chain issue? Or has this always been a bone of contention?
It's twofold. Yeah, so it is a supply chain issue, council member, but it's also that some of these pumps are actually built to order. So they don't exist. They're not assembled and ready. They're built to the specifications we have.
So follow up, so us being able to have some on hand that are ready to go, and considering I live on Railroad Place where the pump station is, I would really like you to have at least one for that one, but and they are religious, the Parks and Public Works folks, about being down there at least once or twice a day and checking on things. So I appreciate the due diligence on all that type of thing, but I do notice when we've had a lot of wet weather and things like that, all these things can affect the downtown, flat underwater surfaces there, so.
Councilor Benson?
So then the factor that causes a pump to go, is it's not necessarily hours. Is there often a catastrophic event where something that shouldn't go through the pump goes through, and there's no anticipating that.
We're approaching the limits of my knowledge, but what I do know is that there's the loads put on these pumps are not equal across the system. And so the infeed of sewage to some of these pumps is under head or pressure, a lot of pressure. That can cause pump failures sooner. That's one factor. And then the other would be the example I gave with the hospital, where the catering causes, compounds to get into that sewer that just cause problems in pumps. So that's about as much as I can tell you on that, but I can gather further information.
We can't just say no more food at the hospital.
No,
I would not recommend it.
Beyond your purview, okay.
It's good food.
Thanks, City.
I've been there.
City Administrator Chambliss also has a response.
So, in example number one, the power cable failure was the power cable detached and actually went into the pump. And that was about 2 weeks getting the power cable out of the pump. So sometimes, yes, it is, things go into the pumps that don't belong there. So it's a variety of circumstances, but usually it's the same as with any mechanical device: wear and tear, load on the system, age of the parts. Lack of maintenance is not one of our problems. We are very good about maintaining everything.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
So we have had occasions where somebody has decided the best way to dispose of a mop head is to
Can you
put it
talk to
down the sewer,
Talk into the mic, please.
is to put it down to sewer, and you never know when somebody's gonna have those ideas. There have been large pieces of clothing which have appeared up in the flow, and a pump doesn't like those things. So it's unpredictable because humans, it all starts with the human, and it's unpredictable what they might think can go down that drain.
Thank you for that. Councilor Johnson?
Yeah, similarly, oils and fats,
And bigger wipes.
baby wipes.
Flushable baby wipes.
Yeah.
They're the worst.
Don't flush.
Don't. They're not, but
Any other question regarding that topic? that it?
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
All right, so thank you, Bill. That's the end of the PowerPoint presentation in which put it back up to the council. If they have any additional questions that we could try to answer tonight. We can't, if we need to conduct some research, we will go back and do that and then ideally return to you on Monday at the budget roundtable for that conversation. I know council has had basically one day to maybe look at the budget document, I think overall. And so if you need more time, that's certainly possible. You feel free to send your questions to us by email as well. We'll do our best to respond in a timely manner.
Councilor Watton.
I know that you're keeping a list, and on that list, it would probably be helpful to have an explanation behind the brush truck and the potential revenues and advantages. We don't need the answer tonight, but it could be at public safety in that report, just to help give some
Not the
context to
brush
it.
truck to other agencies.
Yeah,
Generating.
and that was
revenue
asked to
miles.
me by number
Yeah,
3, but
Generating revenue. Yeah.
What are any other questions?
keep
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
Sure. Okay, it's not necessarily a budget versus a plan. I see here increased contract legal support. Where are we in discussion of getting an on-staff attorney? Shouldn't that be in the plan here? And this is the next biennial.
I believe it is in the plan.
It is. I'm gonna call Kim up to give you the most recent numbers, but we're currently advertising for the city attorney position. Kim, can you come on up and give us the latest?
And to just start, that position has been budgeted in the budget for 25 and 26. So you will see that as a part of the staffing summary overall.
Brian, which page are you
I'm on page 26.
Okay, tuck it in the mic, please.
Oops, sorry. Okay, you're feeling slower than I am. So the position has been advertised for about 2 weeks so far. And as of earlier this afternoon, I looked, there were 409 hits on it and 0 applicants, which is the first time that that's ever happened
Close.
in a position that I've advertised for. So just to let you know, that's where we're at with that recruitment. Anything else? Editor?
Thank you. So what page are you on?
It's page 26. It shows no change in city attorney. It's 1 FTE and it's listed as contract legal support. I would expect it to be a change, noted change in here of on-staff legal support.
So the contract legal support is different from the city attorney. That would be.
Right.
But it's in addition to the city attorney. So it's not, swapping either one. The contract legal support is to provide us with the same level of service that we've been provided by, what's the
Summit.
firm? Summit Law Group, correct? Basically to support us in our CBA negotiations. And specifically, we're gonna have the International Association of Firefighters coming up, as well as maybe just some there in case we've got certain legal support for revenue items in which council has had discussions about in closed session.
Right. Thank you. Councilor Christensen.
If I recall, we used to have 2 city attorneys that were staffed. When did we make the change to 1? Didn't we used to have 2 city attorneys?
So we did used to have one city attorney and one assistant city attorney.
Okay.
Both of those have left. And so consequently, since that date, we have been contracting with Madrona Law Group and David, who you see regularly over there since that time period. Overall, what you've got in the budget is one city attorney. At this point, we do not believe that we need an additional assistant city attorney to provide service to the council as well as staff.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
Strategic plan, $100,000. That was originally in the 2023 or 23-24 biennial budget. What was the dollar figure in that budget?
I believe that was $60,000.
And we're now proposing $100,000.
Given the fact that the utility rate study is approximately $130,000, we think $100,000 is probably sufficient for the strategic plan. In addition, there's other costs associated with just the development of the plan, but also all the column charades and stuff like that, right? So the community meetings that you're gonna have to have in order to support that work, right, overall that goes into it, in addition to the final report that would come out. So there's multiple expenses built into that $100,000, likely not just the consultant fee.
I think we had that conversation in 2023, 24. Okay. Scott, yeah, you covered the truck. In the park streets maintenance services jumps by $500,000 between 2023 and 2025. How do I get through these numbers to get to that? I understand there's additional 0.6 of a head coming in, but that's salary and wages and benefits.
So what page you on?
This is page 32.
So that is likely a research question for us to come back to you on Monday,
Yeah,
unless you've got an answer.
you're amazing if you do. And I'm not doubting it.
So I believe all of that increase is related to our internal service charges. So that includes things like computers, the IT cost, the equipment repair and replacement, and then facilities. And those costs have gone up at the city, and you'll see that in many of our funds and many of
On
our
some of them, yeah.
departments.
Yeah. And then on page 34, community development. I don't see a change in FTEs overall. Yet from 2023 to 2024, salary and wages goes down. Which is
Yes.
okay, but I'm just, how do we do that in the inflationary world?
So we're comparing budget to budget. Council last November, October, November, adopted a change in the staffing levels of multiple departments across the city for the most part. And as a part of that agenda bill, the staffing levels in the CD department went down. But we haven't necessarily presented a budget amendment to reflect that decrease. Mhm.
And then page 37. It probably just warrants more conversation. I guess if we're gonna, given the percentage increase on the North Bend Police Services, I understand angst out of North Bend. So I think it may warrant some more conversation on our side. I'm not proposing anything at this stage.
So what are you proposing?
I'm not proposing anything at this stage.
You're just making a comment about,
I
Services.
understand why they're doing some of the things they're doing if we're proposing to increase that contract cost by 64%. We are changing the understanding of the prior contract. Agreed, we're changing for proper allocation of costs. Okay, but that prior contract was done under a slightly different assumption of allocation. So just in considering that we're doing this, there may be some consideration of maybe a half step. Just to, I'd rather be on terms with North Bend than be in opposition.
We are not opposed to any conversation that North Bend would like to have.
Oh,
Councilor Christensen?
While we're on the topic of the police budget, just running through, there are some decreases. I just want to make sure that folks have looked, since there's we're seeing the reduction 11.5% for salaries and wages. I know that the chief stepped out, but it's for those, and then supplies have gone down and services have gone down from the previous biennium. I was hoping someone could speak to that. I'm pretty sure that I know what the answer is, but there has been some chatter online. So just making sure if any members of the public are listening in or will be, that we take a moment and address it, I think would be helpful.
One of the big changes is that we've adjusted the salaries, who's assigned to North Bend, who's assigned to Snoqualmie. Historically, I think the chief was at 88% to Snoqualmie and 12% to North Bend. We've adjusted him to 65 Snoqualmie, 35 North Bend, and that change has happened throughout to the detective, to the administrative sergeant, for a mental health professional. There are more that I'm missing right now, but that resulted in a significant cost savings to Snoqualmie. Additionally, internal service charges. Historically, we've only been able to charge $70,000 related to vehicles to North Bend for for finances, for payroll, for all the services that happen within the city, computers, vehicles, facilities. All of those have been paid for by the general fund instead of by North Bend. So part of this budget, we're proposing that North Bend takes that share back at the same rate that we've allocated it to all the departments across the city.
Thank you. And so for clarification again, we're not cutting the police budget, we're properly allocating it so that the folks that are benefiting from it are contributing towards it in a more.
You got it exactly
correct-
right.
Yes, thank you.
Counselor Cotton?
And the previous allocation of the 12% and the 88% was based on population statistics.
Contract, just the contract, the terms of the contract.
Fantasy, I think.
Fantasy,
No,
well,
well, hey,
considering
all
that
right.
they have
Hang on.
88% of the calls are in North Bend for the police.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
So I was here. So the original contract was really based on the additional cost to do the contract in isolation, not any of the sundry costs of HR services, payroll, vehicles, all that stuff that we're now talking about appropriately allocating. And some assumptions on the time police chief that would spend versus North Bend, Snoqualmie. Okay. Now we're looking at, well, those officers still require all those overhead services that we do to every other officer. They ought to be burdened at the same rate. Okay, so again, the original contract was just, was 3 officers, 3 shifts. What was the cost for them and vehicles, period? None of the other stuff around them. Because we perceived, one, we weren't going to get rid of any of those things in the background. The chief is not going to spend a quarter of his time at home because we're not doing North Bend. We're still going to have a chief. Okay, so that we kept that out. Just again, there was benefit to us to North Bend, and the consideration at the time was some of that benefit warranted us just isolating just the services that were allocated to North Bend, just the resources that were allocated to North Bend, not the other services to support them, not the other administrative and managerial things to support them also. So doing a reconsideration, better allocate those other things to just the officers on the road. Did I
City-
cover that close?
City Administrator Chambliss has a comment.
I just want to point out that the 65-35 is coming, it's our proposal based on population.
Counselor Johnson?
Are we expecting that a new contract would be adopted by the time that we would adopt this budget? Or is it more likely that a contract would be adopted later and that we would have that we have the potential for a large amendment to the budget based on what happens from those negotiations?
City Administrator Chambliss?
So North Bend City Council, maybe at the second to last meeting ago, I believe, approved a contract with Public Safety Consulting to evaluate the police services they're receiving, and that is a 6-month contract. So it will not be into 2025 before they have that contract. And we have had verbal statements that we've received that state that their council is unwilling to consider a new contract until after they see that report.
Okay. So the latter.
So just to point out, I think for everyone's benefit and maybe the public, page 16, which is the full staffing chart, shows a change in the police department FTEs, but not a decrease in increase. And so consequently, hopefully that can kind of point out to the fact, no, we're maintaining the police department as is. We are just shifting costs appropriately based on the different allocation factors that we would propose to apply to that overall. So consequently, there's no reduction in police service on offer here.
Thanks. Counselor Johnson?
I was going to move off of policing, but if someone has a question related to policing, I'll let you go first.
Counselor One?
I guess my concern is until we have a new signed contract with North Bend for police services, obviously there is a delta of almost $3 million between this year and next year's revenue, and next year's revenue may not happen for some time, is what I'm hearing. How does that impact our revenue coming into the city for 2025, or does it?
Well, we are working through what those scenarios may look like, right, overall, right now, at this point. But there are provisions within the contract that we would follow, and North Bend also has to follow too. So.
Follow-up question, would it be coming from any reserve funds for the difference if we adopt the budget the way it is, or do we subtract out that 3 million or set that aside? I mean, how do we recognize that we have an existing contract with one set of revenue versus what we're anticipating is the new?
City Administrator.
I think the magic 8-ball response says it's cloudy and we'll get back to you later. But the fact of the matter is we don't know. We are meeting with North Bend tomorrow. The mayor and I are meeting with their mayor and city administrator to hopefully clear up some of the picture. But it is a moving target. We may have to change things. We understand that.
Okay.
But to get this document before you and the deadline that we had to make a decision. This is our proposal, and that's the one that we decided to place in the document.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Counselor Johnson?
So then between now and when we could adopt this, should we expect that the assumptions of the new contract could change based on how those discussions are going? And kind of related, at what point does this proposed budget assume that the contract does go into effect? And is there a significant difference between the two? Like, does it assume it starts in March, or does it assume it starts in January? And does that have a significant effect? There's a lot. Did you get all that?
It's going to be a struggle to answer a lot of this right
Yeah.
now at this point. But as Mike stated, they're meeting tomorrow. Really depends on how a lot of these meetings will go, which will determine kind of the course of action that we take with the budget moving forward. It was an uncertainty that we addressed a little bit yesterday overall, and we're very aware of how that may eventually change, which would require a lot of work on our front to modify this proposal in front of you.
Next set of questions? Counselor Johnson?
Okay, well then, if we could move away from police, one of the types of levers that we talked about way back whenever it was, we had those conversations about the 5 different options for increasing revenues. There's this the TBD, BNO tax changes, utility tax, public safety tax, and levy lid lift. We did implement the TBD, and the public did support the public safety sales tax. I didn't see where either the BNO tax changes or utility tax changes were discussed. Are those something that are currently on the table? And if so, in what form?
Those are not currently incorporated into the budget, but certainly we are working through a process to figure out what that may look like. So currently, as we've kind of addressed a little bit with the position subtractions yesterday, overall within the finance department and the general reorganization that has taken place since that date, the goal would be to eventually come back and have more of those discussions at the appropriate time in the future. So certainly considering a B&O tax audit and what that looks like overall. So you can expect information on the future regarding that. In terms of some of the other options too, we may come back to you. And those are some of the levers that we could pull, especially if the lines start looking like they're crossing a little bit sooner.
And kind of related to that, would the utility tax discussion be related all to the fee study, or would that be independent of the fee study?
It would be independent of the fee study. So right now, the utility tax is set at 9% on our combined utilities, water, sewer, and stormwater at the city overall. If you were to expect a certain percentage increase in those utility rates, you'd expect the same percentage increase in our utility taxes over time. So we can adjust the utility taxes, especially for combined utilities, up or down based on what council would want to do. But if there's a increase in the utility rates, then we would see a commensurate increase in our utility taxes.
As a number, but not as a rate.
As a dollar amount in
Yeah.
the budget, yeah.
And I think on the B and O tax, I think we were looking at potential square footage tax.
Yes, we were also contemplating a square footage tax, which we brought up to council at that time. We got about halfway through the work a little bit, and then due to other priorities overall in the department, we haven't come back with anything back to council regarding that.
Council, do you have any other questions or things you would like us to further, I guess, provide information on that we could prepare for Monday? Head shake, no?
Not at this time. I mean, Mayor, I was handed a lengthy document last night. Okay, so I don't expect we that have jobs have had time to go through this and come up with all the questions we might have. I've tried my best. But this is a bit rushed.
Well, it'd be great reading over the weekend. So next
Kids
Monday,
to bed.
after the kids, yeah,
Put
you
the
could,
kids to
you,
bed.
Put the kids to bed. I've done that too.
to them. So next Monday, we do have the special budget session starting at 6 p.m. And then during the week of September 16th, each of the departments will present their budget during the respective council committee meetings. So I would encourage all council members to attend those or watch them on video later, because this is the only time that the departments will be presenting their budget. So it'll be at the council committee meetings. So they will not be presenting them at a council meeting. So I would again encourage you to attend those or watch them later. And then just watch the biennial budget calendar, because there's other upcoming budget workshops that we were going to have, and I'm sure it's probably already on your calendars already. So do you have any other questions or further discussion?
I don't read as fast as the rest of you, so no spoilers, okay?
Has a good ending.
Tell me how it
I think
ends.
it's a suspense novel.
And City Clerk Dina has something as well.
But just a reminder that the International Block Party is on Saturday, and there we'll have a table if you want to come down and.
What about our assigned times? Are we?
Yeah,
Did people complete the poll?
I know I did.
Okay.
I overcommitted.
Did you?
So I mean.
All day, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where, do you know where the table's gonna be?
I don't, but I can find out.
So we can look for it when we meet.
Thank you.
Eventually I'll find it, but
Did anyone else sign up for it?
I was. Yeah, I emailed yesterday.
Oh, so you haven't, okay. Great.
Thank you.
It'll be exciting. I'll be there, and there'll be a Chinese dragon there and all kinds of fun things. So it'll be fun.
noisy fun, yeah.
Yes, it would be great. So with that, anything else? Okay, is there a motion to? So Finance Director, you have anything else?
No, I just want to thank council for, 2 days, right? So I'm sure 4.5, 5 hours or so. So you guys did a great job, and looking forward to kind of continuing to run this marathon with you. So
I
appreciate
think
it.
Rob
Have a
wanted to
great night.
thank you as well.
I want to commend Rob.
And- And thank you, Drew and Janet, for all your work on this. It's been, you helped get us through the information very easily. So thank you.
No, special thanks to the department directors that
Absolutely.
spun their wheels today to get a lot of material prepared, and for Phil Bennett as well, and Mike Bailey especially, both of those. So thank you guys.
Yes, thank you. That was good information. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
Been moved by Councilor Watton, second by Councilor Christensen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? We are adjourned. Thank you. 7:39.